Welcome, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Hello. Good to be with you. Welcome. So as you enter into the space, please just go ahead and let us know who you are in the chat and where you are Zooming from. We see you all in different rooms in your house or outside. So if you want to mention that too, you are more than welcome to. And then since we're going to be talking about soil, compost, waste, these things today, if you have a soil story, something that comes to mind when you consider soil, go ahead and place that in the chat as well.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Carrie and Kathy and Dan. Hey, Jim. Hi, Ernie. Hi, Gary, Mark and Jack. Hey, Robin.
Good to see so many familiar faces.
Wonderful to see everyone.
It's so nice to see everybody again. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Hope everyone had a joyous Easter. Hi, Ann and Susan and Jane. Hey, Peter, Leah.
And for the Episcopalians in the room, happy Easter tide.
Yes, yes.
You're tide, but happy
Wonderful
Easter,
to see
everyone.
Hi, Led and Sally.
And for those of you who are just coming in, we're just going ahead and sharing in the chat who we are, where we're zooming in from, and anything that comes to mind when you think about soil. Anything at all.
Hi, Gary. It's good to see you.
Yes. Hi, Lori. Wonderful to see everyone. Welcome to session 4.
Session 4 of 5. I can't believe we're already here.
Yes, exciting. Hi, Adele.
Hi. So lovely to see everyone. I hope that you have had a moment to settle a little bit and arrive, considering soil, what that might mean to you right now at this time in your life, what comes to mind when you consider it, taking in this art, and the bell hooks quote from her essay, Earthbound. We're now going to go ahead and transition to a time of prayer. We want to honor time as we move through the session today. We always want to take a moment to arrive, to ground, to turn towards being present with one another. So I encourage you to utilize this brief time of prayer to center, to settle, and then I'm going to read this bell hooks quote over us as a prayer and close with just a few words before we transition. So I'm going to go ahead and light a candle to mark this time. I'm old school, I like matches. So I'm going to go ahead and read this over us now. So I invite you to close your eyes or whatever you need to do to just arrive to this time together. Making peace with the earth. We make the world a place where we can become one with nature. We create and sustain environments where we can come back to ourselves, where we can return home, stand on solid ground, and be a true witness. God of witnessing, as we gather today and bear witness to stories of soil, of compost, of waste, and of other ways of participating in regenerative cycles of life that you designed and of which we are a part. I pray that as we bear witness, we do so with courage, with love, with truth-telling, and with grace. Be with us as we learn, as we journey, as we connect. Amen.
Amen.
And welcome to all of you who have arrived in the last few moments.
Yes.
So good to be with you. And then Becky, do you want to walk us through a plan for our time?
Absolutely. So again, welcome everyone to session 4, regenerating, soil, compost, and waste. We're going to be deepening into these things today. And again, we just had our prayer and welcome, so that's wonderful. Hope everyone had a joyous, joyous Easter. It's wonderful to see everyone. And again, we just want to welcome, again, over 50 churches from across 10 denominations. So thankful. We're going to now soon move into our time of education and inspiration, which Russ is going to lead us through some of that as well. And then we are going to be going, of course, into conversation. We're going to be doing 2 breakout rooms like we have done in the past. And of course, those breakout rooms, we are going to be recording, but there will not be recording during the breakout room sessions. So that is just a beautiful time for conversation. And then we are going to move into implementation, and there will be a wonderful time of really looking at some practical and simple ways that we can move into this space. And we're really excited about an inspiration story to share with you tonight too. So that is the plan for our time. Also, we are going to go about an hour and 15 minutes. Possibly might reach the hour 30, depending on how all the how much we all love to share. But we are going to shoot for about an hour and 15. And just a quick reminder of our community guidelines, of course, to be present and feel welcome to the table. Speak kindly, listen deeply, and share generously. We have so much to continue to learn from one another. Honor all voices, and of course, be open-hearted and curious. So I'm going to pass it back to Kaylee.
Great. Thank you so much. And now we're going to go ahead and move into our education section because we really do want to honor the hour 15 and leave time for lingering and talking at the end. So again, we are in session 4, talking about all things that cycle. That is the subtitle in my brain for this session, all things that cycle. And to get us started, we're going to root in our good framework. So what does good look like? Thinking about today, how is soil and compost good for us, good for our neighbors, good for creation of which we are a part, and good across time? And also thinking about the inverse of this with something like waste. How is waste unnatural to us, to nature? We're the only ones who waste, humans. It's a very unnatural concept for the rest of the created world. And how does that waste harm our neighbors? Thinking about landfills here, we're going to talk about those today. Waste is not good for creation. It's also unnatural to it. And then thinking about waste across time too, thinking about how our choices that we made in our history 30 to 50 years ago are now affecting us now, and how our choices today will affect us in our present, but also in the future. So really holding these things together in our conversation today. And some guiding questions. This is just getting our imaginations going, painting some broad strokes. So as Christians, what is our relationship to soil? Knowing that we are made of it, Adam from Adamah, and also have responsibility to tend and care for it. And then how does belonging to the earth, being made of it, and being called to be protectors of its flourishing inform how we think about soil, compost, and a construction such as waste? And then, of course, very practically, and we're really going to be spending time here today, how can we as churches, as people who are a part of churches, serve as hubs and models of composting and other regenerative cycles? So for our first part of our education, we're going to be learning from Reverend Dr. Willie Jennings, thinking about his work, which really lives at this intersection of faith, place, belonging, and race. Reverend Dr. Willie James Jennings is a professor of systematic theology and Africana studies at Yale Divinity School. He is also the author of several books, including The Christian Imagination, Theology and the Origins of Race, and most recently, After Whiteness, An Education in Belonging. I cannot commend his books enough to you all, and I'm sure many of you already are familiar with his work. The excerpt that we are going to be looking at today comes from comes from an interview Dr. Jennings did in partnership with theologian Dr. Norman Wiersbe as a part of a 2021 webinar series. So this is very recent, Facing the Anthropocene at the Kenyon Institute for Ethics at Duke University. I believe they are still in the middle of this webinar series, and we'll send you all the information about this. In this particular interview, they explore core themes in Dr. Jennings' work of belonging versus the construction of separation as a paradigm for our life together. They explore the economic, social, ecological, systemic, spiritual, theological, and aesthetic layers of this paradigm, and also name the series of consequences of its opposite, this construction of separateness, which we so often find ourselves complicit in and subject to in our habitations, in our institutions. So in this interview, Dr. Wiersbe specifically is asking Dr. Jennings about how reconnecting with the soil helps recalibrate us, return us to this paradigm of mutual belonging and responsibility, helps us remember who we are and to whom we belong. So with that, we will now turn to learning from Dr. James Jennings.
What I find about your work, which is so important, especially for our own time, is that you want to extend the discussion about belonging, not simply to intrahuman relations, but you're talking about belonging to the land, right? And you know, we both are fans of Robin Kimmerer, and
Yes.
Bell Hooks has written about this also,
Yes.
about how
Yes.
people being alienated, divorced, cut off from the
Yes.
land does profound psychic damage.
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about how it is you're thinking about our places, our specific lands, watersheds, farming lands, all of these sort of very particular ecological realities, how you're thinking about our belonging to them and its claims upon us, because it's difficult, right? I mean, if you grow food, you know, being claimed by a garden is not always a happy experience. So how do you talk about this belonging? And then we'll come also to the question, which we'll save for now, but why is it that you think in theology in particular, place has been mostly way to the side, hardly taken up?
Well, Lauren, and so much of this, as you know, I have learned so much from your wonderful work on these matters. But you know, look, I grew up with gardeners. You know, Black folks from the South. And here's the thing that most people don't fully appreciate about gardening culture, especially Black gardening culture from folks coming from the South. But it's true all over the planet. I mean, so these two elements I'm about to talk about are crucial. So what it means to be tied to the land and have a sense of belonging that comes of the land is precisely the living out of that right relationship. That is, it is not possession of first. It is possession by first. And possession by then allows one to say quite tentatively, possession of. But you first say possession by. And what does possession by mean? Well, let me talk about my family for just a moment so we can see how this belonging works out. So let's talk about this using the rubrics you used earlier. First, talk about the economic. So I'm the youngest of 11 born to my parents. 8 or 9 of us in the house at most of the time growing up. My dad had a good job, but you know, you can't feed nine people and cousins and everybody else with that. My mother had a twin who also had a large family. And so, and this is how most Black people moving from the South to the North survived in the strange, cold world of the North. In the summer times, they took that little plot of land behind their house or to the side of their house, and with that little piece of fence, and they had a garden, right? And where I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with a wonderful, rich, dark Michigan dirt, man. So the if you went into the backyard, you would look down the whole street through the back, and what you would see going all the way to almost to the end of the street, you would see these gardens in the back, right? with little fences separating them, folks leaning over the fence talking. But so what do we do? So I had a little Stingray bike. I used to ride my bike all through the neighborhoods. But my mother would always often call me and come here, Willie, come into the kitchen. Take this corn down to Sister Slater. She has some peas for me. And then go over to Mother Red, because she has some beans that she's got for me. And you take this bread that I got. Mr. Johnson got some eggs from his chicken. Back when they allowed you to have a chicken. And get them eggs and bread. So what does that mean? We had this beautiful informal economy in which there was beautiful exchange going on. Exchange that economists have not yet even figured out to this moment. This exchange going on all about us. And this is how we got fed. And then as the season started to turn, it was time for canning. It was time for preserving. And so all kinds of things were canned and preserved, put into the basement, cold area of the basement. And so throughout the winter, you ate fresh vegetables. Throughout the winter, you ate good food. My mother, when this was the Walmart before Walmart, there was a place called Myers. And my mother would go to Myers once a month. And it was seen as a sign, of a sign of failure. If you had to go more than that, I mean, I ain't gonna buy them carrots. Why should I buy them carrots? I grow my own carrots. So that's the first reality. That's that economic reality of surviving. And the belonging that is a part of, that the land gives you life. Even as you're surrounded by people who want your death, the land gives you life. But then there's the other part of it. And the other part of it is the touching of the soil, the sitting and being with plant, and there out in the cool of the evening, rehearsing that moment from the Garden of Eden. What am I talking about? So mom and dad, they work hard. At the end of the day, where are you going to find them, especially in the summer months? You're going to find them not in the house. We have a little shotgun house. You're not going to find them in the house. You're going to find them sitting in those wonderful cast iron chairs out in their garden, sitting in the grass, talking, close enough to the neighbors who are also sitting in the grass near their garden, talking, and close enough to other neighbors who can shout across their fence, sitting on the back, laughing, talking. Where are the events going to happen? The birthday parties, the fun and games out in the backyard. Now, that's not simply about a kind of social logic. That's a therapeutic intervention. That's a recalibrating of who I am by touching the dirt. My mother every spring would make me stick my hands in the dirt. And I used to say, why am I sticking my hands in this dirt? Later on, she helped me to understand this is helping you remember not only who you are, but to whom you belong. God created this dirt. Stick your hand in it. See, these are the matters that have escaped us, right? And I've learned this from so many indigenous writers that the land as possession, thinking the land as possession, is a narrowing, in many ways, a grotesque inversion of the deep reality of the land. But for so many people, they have been cut off from both those senses, haven't they? They have no idea how food is grown. They have no sense of the whole process. And they have no sense of why their bodies need to touch the earth. I mean, if there's anything this pandemic has started to bring home to a number of people, is not just that they need to get outside, but something happens if they don't get outside and touch the earth. Something is happening to them. And at the moments in which they feel like they're about to lose their mind, some people are seeing this for the first time, simply by going outside, standing next to this tree, listening to this bird, watching this deer move, watching the squirrel look at you like, what, what's going on? All of this is, to use the words of Edward Kahn, there's there's a semiosis, there's a semiotic reality to the world in which the world brings to us a fundamental sense of ourselves. And that's a theological point. That's also a medical point. That's also an economic point. But it's also a moral point, Norman, isn't it? Because to create habitation, to create built environments that deny both those realities is immoral, fundamentally immoral. Right?
Yeah.
Not a question of, it's not aesthetically pleasing, isn't that as well? But there's something fundamentally immoral in creating habitation, creating built environments in which those two realities I just named are constantly thwarted. And we're constantly told that they are not the way to live.
So I want to take.
Okay. We will be sending you the link to that interview in full. I highly, highly recommend it. It's a fantastic interview. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We are going to go into conversation now to talk about what we just observed and listened to. So we are going to go off into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And then we will come back together and continue on with our education. So Rush should be putting the discussion questions in the chat. We also emailed them out. So however you like to access them, they are there for you. And then we will come back together and continue forward in our.
Welcome back through the tunnel. Yes.
So it's so nice to see you all.
Through the talking tunnel.
So nice to see you all. We have missed you all. Oh my goodness. So
I find myself just wanting to catch up with everyone.
That's right. I had some company in the main room this time, so it was good.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So we do have a few minutes to just do just some quick takeaways. If anybody would like to share something that might have stood out to you from your breakout room, just throw a hand up, and Kaylee and Russ, if you can help me see hands. And we probably have time to hear from one or two people. And then if there's anything else anybody would like to share, please put it in the chat, because we will be collecting all of this and sending it to you in the Going Deeper resources as well. So
yeah, we're gonna watch our time a little bit and try to move forward. So
yes. So is there anybody who would like to share real briefly something that stood out in your breakout room?
And if not, that is totally okay.
Yeah, if not, that is great. There will probably be lots to share in the next breakout room.
Yes.
Oh, Peter's mentioning that Gary pointed out the impact of air conditioning. Woo, yes, that is a whole conversation. Yeah, that would be a great session, actually. That we will note that.
Thank you.
Well, as you think about reflections to share, just go ahead and put them in the chat and we will keep moving. But again, it's just so great to see you all. So now turning, oh yes, breakout room reflections, we've done it. Now turning to the next part of our education, we got to hear from Dr. Jennings about the spiritual power of reconnecting to the reality of soil, of which we are all a part, placing our hands in the dirt. We got to share stories with one another about that. And now we're going to turn to the ecological and the scientific dimensions of soil. And we're going to do this by watching a very short video from Kiss the Ground. Some of you may have already seen it, but it's always worth returning to if you have not, or if you already have. If you've not seen it, you're in for a treat. So this is the soil story from Kiss the Ground.
My name is Passion Murray, and I make compost in the city of Detroit. I want to share with you a story about soil, farming, and compost, and how it can be a solution for climate change. Climate change is a big problem. It's happening because there's too much carbon in our atmosphere, but carbon is not our enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything alive is made of it. It's us. The problem and the solution are a simple matter of balance. Let's step back and look at the 5 pools where carbon is stored on planet Earth. Starting about 500 million years ago, when plants came onto land, carbon began to cycle in an amazing balance, a balance that allowed for life as we know it to evolve. Then one life form, us, figured out how to extract carbon from the fossil pool. We've been burning it for energy, putting it into play, and disrupting that balance. How we manage land and do agriculture is moving even more carbon from the soil and biosphere into the atmosphere. Specifically, we've moved 880 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is heating up the planet and destabilizing our climate. Now, the oceans have absorbed a lot of this excess carbon, which is resulting in warming temperatures, acidification, and accelerating a mass extinction of sea life. In order to stop global warming, of course we have to stop burning fossil carbon. The big question is, where do we put the excess carbon to get the cycle back in balance? Remember when I said that soil was a part of the solution? It literally is. Plants, with sunlight and water, perform photosynthesis. They pull carbon in from the air and turn it into carbohydrates, sugars. Then they pump some of those sugars down through their roots to feed microorganisms who use that carbon to build soil. There we go. Carbon moved. The plants pull it in and the soil stores it. Nature's living technology is amazing. Scientists have recently discovered that applying a thin layer of compost one time sets up an ongoing positive feedback loop that brings more and more carbon into the soil each year. In concert with our regenerative practices like not tilling the soil, planting trees and cover crops, and good grazing, we can build and retain gigatons of soil carbon. This is carbon farming, this is regenerative agriculture. More carbon in the ground is good for us. It makes healthy soil. Healthy soil makes for more nutritious food, and it holds way more water so crops are more resilient in the face of drought. That's good news for families, farmers like me, and everyone that eats. The way we grow our food, fuel, and even our clothes either puts carbon into the atmosphere or pulls it down into the ground. The regeneration of soil is the task of our generation. Our health, the health of the soil, and the health of the planet are one and the same.
I hope that was helpful. I've seen this a few times now as we've been going through it. And every time I pick up something different from watching the video, it's great. But I love this introduction of the carbon cycle. And, we were just, I was making this connection of, we were just talking with, or Dr. Jennings' video was just kind of sharing the interconnectedness of all of us. And then the carbon cycle just lays on this biological interconnectedness, all of us, and Anne talking about kind of the end of life pieces. And it just, we're just so interconnected in so many ways. And this is why I love bringing the stories of faith and science together in one place, because it just adds layers of understanding and meaning all the time. So before we move into our discussion of waste and compost, which is where we're going, just want to revisit real quickly the drawdown models that we introduced in our very first meeting, which is now several months ago. And if you remember, the gray box in this slide is the atmosphere, and that's that same atmosphere carbon pool that we saw in the video just a couple minutes ago. Sources on the left, those are where all of the greenhouse gases are coming from, and our sinks on the right, which is nature. That's our biosphere and soils and oceans from the carbon cycle slide. Those are helping us out and taking carbon out. And 60% of what we put in still remains in the atmosphere. And just like Passion Murphy said in the soil story, the question is, what do we do with all that excess? Because it just keeps accumulating more and more and more every year. And this is the great part about drawdown. So as they focus upon these sources, all the solutions that they present are about changing the ways we draw from that fossil pool and actually generate electricity and food and transportation and buildings and industry, and do all these things in ways that don't continue contributing to our atmosphere. And then when we shift over and look at the solutions in land and ocean, all of those are about increasing the carbon storage capacity of our biosphere, our soils, and our oceans. Okay. So with that, I want to transition into our kind of discussion about waste and compost, which is where we're going to spend the rest of the evening. And last month we teed up this discussion a little bit, and we talked about how waste has grown in the United States. And in 2020, we were generating 300 million tons of waste as a country, and that was up 150% from just 50 years ago. And individually, it's kind of the same story, 1,800 pounds per person, which has also grown by 54%. And all of that waste ends up in a landfill. And, we don't think about landfills a whole lot other than, there's some place where all our trash goes, right? And in preparing for this, I actually had to kind of take a deep dive into a landfill or into landfills and learn about them. And I was surprised by several things. So let's talk about this in a little bit. Before the 1930s and 40s, we used to burn the majority of our trash. Landfills are relatively new. There's two problems mainly with landfills. So the first thing is that as all this waste decomposes, it generates methane. And methane's a really powerful greenhouse gas. It's anywhere from 25 to 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And that methane that gets generated, if it was in a normal decomposition process, would be carbon dioxide instead. The second problem is that as water collects on landfills and percolates through, it creates leachate. And leachate is, if you think about water mixing with all of the toxins and trash and everything and decomposing matter and then dripping down through the landfill into our groundwater, that's exactly what leachate is. We started these in the 1940s and 50s. By the 1970s, this was a huge national problem. You might have heard of Love Canal in New York. It was one of the highest profile kind of environmental disaster sites in the 70s. And that really prompted a whole bunch of legislation. And that legislation led to our modern landfills, which look a little bit different. So let's look at those. The first thing, it's required now that landfills actually have plastic and clay liners to contain all of that leachate. That leachate, so it doesn't just sit there and accumulate, actually is pumped out and processed and cleaned like municipal wastewater is done. And then the methane gas is actually, in most cases, collected out of landfills. Sometimes it's burned and turned into electricity. It's not exactly a green energy source because burning methane actually releases carbon dioxide, but that is a better process than just releasing methane directly into the atmosphere for sure. About 50% of our open landfills currently are actually generating electricity this way. And finally, landfills are also required to drill a series of monitoring wells around the landfill. And this actually tests the groundwater for pollutants and contaminants to make sure that leachate is not actually dripping through the landfills. So this all sounds great, right? And you say, well, this is wonderful. Landfills sound like a good solution, better than burning. So what's the problem? Well, there's actually four. And the first one is these containment liners. They are designed to fail. They are going to fail. Every landfill that we have in the country, depending on how they constructed the liner and when it was done, there's somewhere between a 5 and 75 year lifespan of the liners. So they are 100% going to fail. They're literally designed that way. They're only warranted for 20 years by their manufacturers. And the other thing that we've discovered is that you really can't repair them. When they start leaking, it actually causes more harm to dig them up and try and fix the leak than it does just to let it to leak slowly. So they literally are not repairable at this point. The second problem is that trash takes a really long time to decompose. Some of our trash, not all of it, but Things like water bottles are 100 to 450 years. Aluminum and steel cans, think of a paint can that gets thrown away, 200 years to decompose for that. Diapers, 500 years to decompose. Batteries, I cringe every time I think about how many AAA batteries I've thrown away in my life, but they're over 100 years to decompose. And when you combine this time frame with the fact that our containment liners are going to fail in 50 to 75 years, that means that half of the life of decomposition or more is going to happen after our containment liners have already failed. The third thing is that there's no long-term monitoring in place. The legislation actually requires that landfills be monitored for 30 years after they close. Most landfills will be open for 20 to 30 years. So let's say a maximum of 60 years that a landfill will actually be monitored, okay? So again, you think back to the numbers we just went over. The containment liners might last 75 years. So that means 10, 15 years after we stop monitoring is when all the liners will fail, things will continue to decompose. And it literally is just going to be a problem that we don't have any visibility into, okay? The last problem, and this is like, it's so many things that we've seen as we've been going through this program, is that landfills really intersect with racial, economic, and health inequities and justice. If you live near a landfill site, it increases your exposure to air and groundwater pollution, and it's associated with a whole host of health issues. A 2019 study found that 78% of people living near landfills experience health issues like respiratory issues, eye irritations, increased flu frequency, and body weakness, which is a result of methane primarily. From an economic standpoint, all of the communities surrounding a landfills actually bring down land values and actually lower the economic value of that land. And because of those two things primarily, finding locations for landfills is really hard. And you get a whole bunch of pushback from communities. You're not going to put a landfill near me, and that not in my backyard syndrome that people talk about is very, very prevalent in discussions around where landfills go. And as a result, landfills most commonly end up near our poorest and our communities of color. And they're the communities that are already the most impacted by environmental change. And we add landfills as another layer of injustice on top of that whole existing structure. Dr. Jennings mentioned in his video earlier that, habitation built on separateness rather than mutual belonging is immoral. And as I was preparing this and we were thinking about all of this, the economic, racial, health, environmental impacts of landfills, it just feels immoral to me to think that this is not a morally correct way of dealing with our waste. So what do we do about it? Well, before we go there, there's one last thing we need to look at, which is how many landfills there are. And there are a lot of them. There are over 3,000 active landfills just in the United States. The red dots on this map are the open landfills. There's another 10,000 landfills that are closed. A lot of those landfills were created before 1970, and there's literally no monitoring or liner systems or containment systems at all for those. So what do we do about this? Well, we know that burning waste is also bad, releases stuff right into the atmosphere. But here's the thing that's really interesting. Half of the waste that goes into landfills is actually compostable. So you might remember from a couple sessions ago, we talked about food and food waste, and food waste is the single largest component of landfills. And when you add food waste with cardboard and wood and other organic material, it's over half of the material that goes into landfills is actually compostable. So there's a really easy, direct way to take half the stuff out of our landfills just with composting. The remaining 50% was really the focus of our session last month when we talk about purchasing and responsible purchasing and living simply. That's all of the stuff that we buy that's, made in plastic or covered in plastic or designed to fail, this idea of planned obsolescence. So when we choose longevity items instead of single-use items, when we choose to keep something for a few extra years instead of throwing it away and buying something new, when we purchase carefully, all of that helps to reduce the remaining 50% of stuff that is not compostable from going into landfills. So the point of all of this is not to shame anybody or do any of that. I mentioned, batteries, but, I think about the diapers and shoes and clothes and all of the things that we've thrown away in our lifetime. I and my family are as complicit in this as anybody else. But now that we know, and now that we see some of this, the question is, what do we do about it? And I think, especially as Christians and members of the church, we have a responsibility to model a different way, to really introduce and share a different way of handling this. So with that, I want to transition this story to compost because it is a really effective way of doing some things. And we have a short video also from Kiss the Ground. This is the Compost Story. It goes into a little bit more detail about this. It's only about 6 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and share that. Give me just 1 second. I need to unshare my screen.
This is another really good time for a stretch.
Yes, it is.
And all of that. So
I know that's a lot.
Take a deep breath.
And
we're going to enter into some solutions now and
Yes, we are.
tell an inspirational story about a church already doing this well. And I know some of you are parts of this solution too. So deep breath and we will journey forth.
Absolutely. Okay, here we go.
Good news to come.
Yes.
All right. It's easier for me to start these videos when Kaylee's sharing her screen, but here we go.
Have you ever looked at a banana peel and wondered, is that it?
All that time spent nurturing the banana and now it's just waste?
Could this humble peel serve a greater purpose?
Currently in the US, over 60 billion pounds of mineral-rich food material go to landfills each year.
Imagine if we diverted those billions of pounds from the landfill and turned them into compost.
Imagine our cities, vacant lots converted into food forests. Imagine abundance everywhere.
And it can help reverse climate change.
But most likely, it won't. Why? Because we're insane.
We define waste as anything unused, unproductive, or not properly utilized.
But waste is a human invention. We're the only creatures on Earth who don't live a zero waste existence.
Yep, thanks to trillions of microbes that are in and around everything, including us.
Anything that lives gets repurposed and contributes to the growth of new life.
Some 500 million years ago, these microbes brought plants onto the land.
The microbes provided minerals and water in exchange for carbon sugars produced by the plants through photosynthesis.
This resulted in a terrestrial explosion of life.
More life meant more excretions and deaths, which meant more food and nutrients for decomposers, and all soil life, known as the soil food web.
This increased the abundance and biodiversity of ecosystems and turned barren land into fertile soil.
Today, composting mimics this natural upcycling process, transforming combinations of organic material into life-filled, nutrient-available organic matter.
Compost isn't just mulch, manure, or food waste on its own, nor does it stink. Compost has the aroma of the forest floor after a rain.
It also has superpowers. Compost can enhance food nutrition, increase crop yield, and strengthen plants' immune systems, all while increasing the soil's water-holding capacity. And Compost stimulates plant growth by bringing in microbial life, nutrients, and water-retaining humus to depleted soils.
More plant growth takes even more carbon out of the atmosphere. Microbes feed plants. Plants feed microbes, and the self-regenerating soil carbon pump cycles on, building soil.
Compost is a regenerative substance. It isn't just fertilizer. It's an essential microbial source, a probiotic for the land beneath our feet.
Now, while we've made some great progress recycling paper and even composting yard trimmings, currently in the US, over 50% of trash going to landfills is food scraps, paper, yard trimmings, and wood, all compostable materials. We are throwing away the very building blocks of life. Only 5% of our food scraps get composted. 5%. That means over 60 billion pounds of mineral-rich food material, much still fully edible, the weight of 4.5 great Egyptian pyramids, go to landfills each year. And there it rots, creating methane gas, a greenhouse gas up to 86 times more potent than CO2. And it's not just food. Grass, leaves, and clippings, all designed by nature to fall back to the ground and increase fertility, are shipped miles to landfill. Now that's insane. Some city governments are finally stepping up by providing green bins to make composting more available, but too often they're misused. Toxic material, trash, is being mixed with the stuff we grow our food in. Just stop it! Don't put toxins or non-organics in that bin, please! Our current agricultural system robs our soils of carbon and biology, replacing them with chemicals, leading to more degeneration and desertification. We've broken the regenerative loop of life. It's crazy.
Without soil, life on land as we know it is impossible. And soil without life, it's just dust.
If the soil is being stripped of its life-giving qualities, what can help save our future? Properly made compost. The soil would be spongy again, retaining water and restoring our underground water supplies.
Fertile farms producing tastier and more nutritious food and no longer covered in toxic chemicals.
Imagine a farm to table to compost to farm system.
This is the regenerative system our future depends on. And doing it at home is easier than you think. You can't at home? Use your green bin. If you for some reason don't have a green bin, request one from your city. Or find a neighbor or community garden who can use your compostables.
Cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and my hometown, New York, are leading the charge. Thank you.
Countries from Haiti to Australia are using compost to address food security and desertification.
Schools, hospitals, and restaurants are waking up to composting their food scraps.
Scientists and compost manufacturers are improving methods, making our superhero even more powerful.
Yes! Life isn't over for the humble peel. Along with other organic material, it can help restore fertility to our soil, regenerate our food systems, clean our water.
And it can help reverse climate change. Really.
Okay, so what can you do?
Do all you can to support composting.
If we're to keep the planet habitable, human beings must participate in regeneration.
Each of us can play a role to help regenerate our planet simply by composting.
The cycle of this can make or break us. You choose.
All right.
Hey.
And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time.
And while Russ is doing that, I'm going to go ahead and put the questions for our next breakout room in the chat, where we'll discuss this together. Russ is just going to do a quick review for us before we launch into breakout rooms.
A lot to digest, I know, in the last 20 minutes here. So thank you all for hanging in there with us as we went through it all. We're just going to recap a little bit so that we kind of don't lose sight of all this. We think about going back to our model for good. And what does good look like? Good for us, good for neighbor, good for creation, good over time. And as we think about, the process of a landfill compared to the process of compost. For that half of the stuff that we're sending to landfills currently that could be composted, it feels like compost is really the only choice that we should be thinking about. Of it's good for us, good for neighbor, good for creation. It's good across time, all of those things all at once. And it's really not even that much, if at all, it's not that more difficult to do than just dropping things in the landfill. So when we compare that to landfills and we think about the impact, both economically, health, from the environment, we can see that those things are not good for us, not good for neighbor, not good for creation, and certainly not good over time. So let's just recap real quickly. What did we learn? So Dr. Jennings reminded us that we are all interconnected, that the land literally gives us life. We talked about carbon cycle and how the soil can be such a huge store for carbon. We explored the troubles and issues with landfills, of containment liners failing, long decomposition times, no long-term monitoring, and all the racial, economic, and health inequities associated with them. And we talked about compost as an alternative and a moral imperative to think about waste in a different way. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get ready to move into our breakout rooms. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and prep the breakout rooms real quick. I know these always feel too short, but we're already running a few minutes behind. So I'm sorry if I cut off anybody's conversation. So,
That's all right. It can all be composted.
It can all be composted. Very good.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and thank y'all for hanging in there. We are now going to turn to some practical. So here we go. We're going to share takeaways, but before we do that, we want to honor our story that we've been so excited to share with you all. So when we were doing research for this program or for this session, we were looking for churches who were doing composting ministries or had composting programs because we wanted to be able to share their stories. And we came across Community UCC Raleigh and Gary Smith. And it turns out that Gary Smith and Community UCC Raleigh is in our program. It was one of those crazy kismet moments where everything aligned. So we reached out to Gary and he was so generous in sharing his story with us. And he's here with us tonight and is going to share about how they got started, how they got their composting ministry program started, how it works, how they fundraised for it, their ministry moments, Gary would say, how they got the funding for it, and then how it surprisingly grew within the pandemic. So Gary, I think you're here. If you would just tell us your story, kind of walking into a few of those details,
Sure.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Kaylee. I'll try to be brief. I know people want to leave. So the composting was an effort of ours around climate change, because we realized, just as Russ has told us, that methane is a terribly strong greenhouse gas, 25 to 80 times worse than carbon dioxide. So we wanted to eliminate that from landfills. And we tried to do some composting on site for a while, but we never could get that right. And in Raleigh, there is no curbside compost pickup. So, but there is a company in Raleigh called Compost Now that will give you a bin, and you can see me standing in front of the bin, dumping our compost in. They give you a bin, and then they just replace that bin and empty it every week. I actually think it's a little expensive. It costs a little over $100 a month for them to pick up the compost from us. But I thought we wouldn't be able to do it, but we did a ministry moment about it, where a family talked about how they deal with their compost and bring it to the bin. And the money was outpoured so quickly to support this that we actually had to tell people to stop donating. So the first couple of years of it was completely supported off budget. We've now incorporated it into our budget because that's what the congregation wanted. The other thing that Kaylee mentioned is the pandemic. We started composting because we wanted to have, shall we say, a zero waste fellowship hour. So we either use plates or compostable cups and compostable plates, and any food scraps go into the compost bin. So I figured when we stopped worshiping locally, when we stopped worshiping face to face, I figured that composting was going to actually stop. So I spoke with Compost Now and said, look, can we cut this back? And they said, well, let's go to every other week. So we did, and that saved us some money. But what we found, because we've had all along have encouraged people to bring their compost from home, the amount of compost actually increased by about 50% during the pandemic. So people at our church had just embraced the concept, so that now we've got solar panels on our church, so that now we're sequestering about as much carbon with our composting as we do with our solar panels. And that's been really exciting for me. When we first did that calculation, my wife is the person who noticed it. I was just knocked off my seat. And it's because we use that 25 times factor, which is a conservative number for keeping methane out of the landfill. And I think that's all I want to say. But you can do it. You can do it in your yard, or there's probably a compost supplier in your neighborhood too.
Yeah.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Gary, thank you for sharing your story and for the work that you guys are doing on that. And that's, I would never have thought to compare composting's impact to solar panels. And I was just so surprised when you shared that the impact was equivalent or even greater from composting. And so thank you for bringing that up. It was really helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, Gary, it's such an inspirational story. And just to reiterate, you just have folks bring their food scraps in whatever containers and dump them into the bins, right?
Thanks. And one of the things people always worry about is, what am I going to do with it until I get it? So my wife and I have a Tupperware bin that we keep in the refrigerator, and we put our food scraps in that during the week. And then when we go to church on Sunday or whenever we go, we just take that Tupperware bin and empty it into the compost bin. Other people freeze it, and the Compost Now will take pizza boxes, etc., and bones, etc., and all that stuff goes into the bin.
Great.
Truly a multi-offering at church.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yes, Compost Now is an amazing organization that you can work with. LA Compost is another great resource, and we're going to we have a list of resources for you all who are interested in this model that we'll be sending in our Going Deeper resources. So those will be coming to you on Tuesday. And then
guys,
also
just before you move on, Kayla, I just want to acknowledge we're coming up on 5:30. Yeah. If anybody needs to leave, please feel free to do so. We're going to share just a couple of closing thoughts, and then we're also going to stick around just to answer any questions if anybody has. So if you have some questions that you want to share, just know that we're going to stick around for a few minutes afterwards, and we'll be glad to chat with anybody that wants to. So
yeah, great, thank you. And just in case anyone needs to leave, I'm going to skip very quickly to the last slide. We just want to give you some next steps and reminders, and then we'll just open it up for dialogue. Going Deeper resources will come to you on Tuesday, so keep an eye out for that. Lots of practical stuff coming this Tuesday. Connect in the Growing Together virtual community. Monthly congregational meetings, for those of you holding them, we will be sending you a meeting outline. And also we have an announcement. So we had a Faith and Food Justice Forum after our food session a few months back, and it was so well received that we decided to have another one. So we are going to be having a Faith and Food Justice Forum, a second one, next Thursday, April 15th at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. You're going to get an invitation to this specifically on Monday or Tuesday, so don't worry about that. But we connected with Dr. Karen Crozier. She wrote a book on Fannie Lou Hamer's Practical Theology on food, faith, and human rights activism. She is going to be with us, sharing about her work and also taking questions at the end. So going to be an amazing session next Thursday, April 15th, 4 p.m., 7 p.m., just one session. So
and that'll also be recorded if you can't make it. So
yes, but we wanted to invite you to that. And then our last session, session 5, is May 13th. We are going to pull all of this together. We're going to create a pathway for you all to continue in this. So we really look forward to seeing you there. Yeah. And we just wanted to thank you all for coming today, for spending your time. We really hope to see you next Thursday for the Faith and Food Justice Forum, the second one. And now we can informally just say goodbye for all of those of you who need to leave. But we are going to just stick around and give a few more implementation ideas and take some time for anyone who wants to hang out and just talk for a few minutes. So thank you all for those of you who need to leave. And then for those of you who are hanging out, we're going to talk a little bit more about implementation. So some ideas. As mentioned, and I'm sure many of you had these conversations in your groups, you can compost at church, you can compost at home, you can take your food scraps from home and compost them at church. You can also use your green bin. If your city composts, you can go ahead and put your food scraps in that green bin. If your city does not compost or you don't know, you can always ask your hauler, your waste hauler, if you can get a green bin or start that conversation in your city. That's a great thing to do. Or you can start a compost ministry, as Gary was mentioning, that takes a particular shape with their partnership with Compost Now at UCC Raleigh, Community UCC Raleigh. But you can also compost on site if you have the wherewithal and the volunteer support to do that. Absolutely a great option. So if we just look at this really, really briefly, household composting, and many of you already do this, but it is so easy. You can just get a bowl. We have a bowl at our house that we just throw our food scraps in. And then when it gets full, we put it in a tumbler and we tumble that around for a little while. And then that turns in eventually to compost, which we use to grow plants. And then we harvest those plants and we eat them together and then put the food scraps back in the bin and the compost, and the whole thing regenerates itself. But even better than this is if you do that at home and do this at church. So this just takes a larger form of you have your bins, you have one bin dedicated to compost or food scraps, and then you can either compost on site, like you see this open system here. So if you're composting on a larger scale, that's a great option. Or you can partner with an organization like LA Compost or Compost Now, and they can take those food scraps and turn them into compost and distribute them throughout your city. But if you're composting on site and you have a garden, you could take that compost, take the food scraps, turn them into compost, turn them into soil to plant your food in, and then you can share that food with your community or in a separate ministry that you have, and then the whole cycle repeats itself. Compost can be expensive, so if you do have the space, expensive to buy, yes. Yeah, right. So if you do have the space, there's a lot of good reasons to consider composting on site. Okay, so that concludes our sharing. Are there anybody else who would like to share anything that came up in their groups?
Or
any resources, any questions? I see Gary's still here, so if anyone has any questions for Gary, it's a great time to ask those questions.
Any other questions?
I was just going to mention, somebody asked me I talked about this in the breakout room and they asked me to mention it. Is if you have local chicken farmers, that's a great way to get rid of your scraps. And so the link I posted, sharewaste.com, that's where you can hook up with people looking to compost or looking for things for their chickens. So you say whether you need stuff or you have stuff to give, and you can find someone near you that way.
Awesome.
Great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Don. Any other things to share? I was gonna, just a gentle reminder, at the last session in May, on May 13th, after that session, we are going to be giving resources to a lot of these supplies and things like that that will put some things at the fingertips, your fingertips, if that is helpful as well, to implementing some of these things. Is there anybody else wants to share or ask Gary a
Yeah,
question?
I'd be curious as to how this landed with people. If anybody wants to just share, you know, kind of what stood out in tonight's session, or what you feel like was the most helpful or informative for you, I'd love to just hear some feedback on that if you've got a minute or two to share.
Well, so this is Peter Van Dorsten. I would say that we tried composting. We actually have a compost bin at the church. It never really worked because we didn't generate enough at the church. And we didn't really think to invite people to bring their compost to church, but now I think we're going to look into it.
Good.
Great.
I love it.
Great. That's fantastic.
Anybody else?
I have a question about kiss the ground, kiss the land. We're talking about doing a screening at our church as well. And are these things that you've shown, were they from the video?
So those are separate videos. Those
are separate videos. Okay.
They're separate videos, but some of the material is incorporated into the longer form. And so the thing I would say about, because we've all seen the Kiss the Ground documentary, and I would say in general it's very good. There's a lot of great information there. The president or the executive director of actually drawdown.org did a brief commentary on it, because my only caveat with it is that they really kind of press that this soil regeneration part can solely solve climate change. And everything that I've seen that's taken a hard look at the actual data says that it can be part of a solution, but not solely the solution, and a really important part of the solution. But the reality is it's going to take more than just the soil regeneration. So I think if you approach it with that in mind, on the drawdown.org site, there's a section. They recently released a whole bunch of new videos, and there's a piece in there where he specifically talks about it, and he actually addresses exactly that issue. So I think if you watch it with that caveat, there's a lot of really good things to learn from it. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think as Dawn said, we're going to have a discussion session afterwards, and so I'll definitely bring that up in the discussion. Thank you, Russ.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, and I see Adele, your hand, and definitely want to honor that question. The only thing I wanted to add on Kiss the Ground is there is a faith-based discussion guide through Interfaith Power and Light. I put the link in the chat for those of you interested in holding screenings with a faith-based conversation following, and many of you, I'm sure, already plugged into Faith Climate Action Week. But that link is there in the chat. We're also going to be including that in the Going Deeper resources on Tuesday. So that's there for you. Adele, did you have a question?
I did have a question. I just wanted to give you some feedback. I think that having this kind of discussion at this level with the Kiss the Ground people, even though we've tried this before, like someone else mentioned, like Gary said, and it didn't really work. I think that happens. But it does make one sort of focus and say, let's give this a try and do it a little bit differently. It's such good awareness. And I love the first speaker and the backyard and the bargain economy. And
that was great.
Really good.
Willie is just such a joyful presence. I love listening to him. And it was just wonderful.
He's also an extraordinary theologian, and I'm a little biased because I'm going to be able to study with him next semester. So, but I have to say, we are going to be sharing all of his books in the Going Deeper resources and the full-length interview that was excerpted from, really, and it's just excellent. It's just really high-quality stuff. So,
In one other thing, Gary, I noticed in the picture that you sent us of the compost bins that you're using, all the signage that you guys did in front of that was one of the other things that really stood out in our research that I didn't really get a chance to share in the main session, but that signage is actually really important. And it probably is, especially signage that has pictures of what goes in the various bins. It's one of the most effective ways of making sure stuff gets sorted well at source. And so good job you guys doing that.
Yes. And Scott, who I see still here, Scott.
Thanks, Peter.
That was one of the questions that Scott mentioned too, is what exactly goes in the compost bin. So again, the signage, super important. And we'll have some links for those things in the Going Deeper resources as well. And then the other thing I was going to share, since we've talked about kind of compost ministry at church and doing it, one of the other things that we found in our research, I think last month, was, I think it was Church of the Nativity. They were doing a composting ministry, and they actually went ahead and purchased buckets. I think stainless steel buckets or some kind of friendly buckets, and handed them out at church to remind folks to just put their food scraps in and bring them back to church. So it was just kind of this reminder to have folks bring them back to church. A whole nother kind of a gift at church. So, but then just another idea that seemed to be really helpful for them.
Any other thoughts, comments, experiences to share? Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's been a long night.
I just wanted to mention, I went ahead and for you LA folk, or Southern California folk, I went ahead and put in LA Compost. So they're kind of the equivalent organization of Compost Now for Los Angeles. So that's there for you. The other thing I just wanted to mention in regards to Kiss the Ground is always, and you all are aware of this because many of you have been in this work a long time, but always sharing documentaries and conversation with other material and other documentaries, and continuing this dialogue from many perspectives and points of view, particularly when there are many stories to tell, is always the thing that is going to have the deepest and widest impact. And so just by way of a suggestion, there is another video or another documentary that is being shown in this time of Wangari Maathai's work with planting trees. And so I just wanted to put that in the chat. It's for free. You can view that. So if you're looking for ways to continue the conversation, this is another great documentary, as well as Native is another fantastic documentary about land, indigenous history, food culture. So lots of options there.
Yeah, and I will say the Kiss the Ground video is very hopeful. You know, it shares a lot of material, but it ends on a very hopeful note. And I think that's always good to balance those two things. So.
And it's very clear.
Yeah.
Very clear.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anybody else? Comments? Thoughts? All right.
Great.
Well, guys, thank you so much for sticking around. Good night, everybody. And again, happy Easter. And it was lovely to see you all. I'm excited for next month and next week too. So I hope to see you next week.
Hope to see you next week for
Good night, everybody.
Part 2.
Thank you, folks.